Today is Friday, January 20th, 2023. My name is Judy Herrera, and I'm in Simi Valley, California. It is my honor and pleasure to interview John Downey on behalf of the Conejo Valley chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution and Colonial Dames 17th Century for the Veterans History Project with the Library of Congress. This interview is being recorded by Ed Lynch from Advana Videography and contains the reflections and memories of the veteran during his time in the Navy. This is John's story. John, you were born November 29, 1944, in San Francisco, California, to John Downey and Catherine Thompson. You were the oldest of three boys. You attended St. Stephen's through 8th grade and high school at St. Ignatius. You had a paper route and enjoyed baseball. In 1962, you graduated from high school. Do you want to pick up your story there?
Yes, I applied for an appointment to the Naval Academy with Congressman William Maillard, our local congressman, and he appointed me. I was the second alternate. The other two ahead of me took scholarships elsewhere. One went to Stanford on the NROTC program. The other one, I believe, went to the Air Force Academy, but I don't. It's far enough back, and I could care less.
Yeah, right.
Okay. We left, I graduated on the 12th of June, and 5 days later, we got in the car, my mom, my dad, my two brothers, and I. And we drove across Interstate 80, stopped in Gettysburg, and then went into Annapolis.
Nice.
I was sworn in on the morning of the 27th of June, 1962. And my parents then got back in the car, went up to New York, and came back on the northern route through Niagara Falls and Mount Rushmore and Yellowstone. So
Nice.
they got to see a little bit more of the country than I did. We were traveling fast going east. They took their time going west.
Oh, nice. So how did your parents feel about your appointment?
Well, my dad was tickled pink. I mean, he was prouder than a peacock, and my mother was very proud also.
Of course.
The whole family was.
Yes.
So,
So tell us a little bit about a Naval Academy experience.
well, my plebe summer, I was in the third wing on the top deck. My roommate was from Mobile, Alabama, and I had two roommates. The other one was from Tacoma. Mike graduated, the one from Tacoma, and he's our class secretary right now. The other roommate from Mobile had a girlfriend named Caluette. Caluette is a family name on my father's side.
Wow.
So most of my grandmother on my father's side's family worked for the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, and of course that went all the way down to Mobile. So I have no doubt that somewhere, in some loose connection, his red-haired girlfriend was related. But he lasted about 2 weeks. He had been at Marion military, been through all that stuff, and he couldn't put up with the plebe summer and left. So, but we had a busy plebe summer. I have always been a little heavy. I was 180 pounds when I got there. By the end of the summer, I was under 150.
Wow.
So they sweated everything out, got me into pretty good shape. We're class of 66, and tradition through that time, everybody had to do a number of push-ups in succession for your class number. So the class of 59 did 59 push-ups plus one to beat Army. Class of 75, 10 years later, 75 push-ups plus one to beat Army.
Wow. So you had 66 plus one to beat Army.
Yes, ma'am. And then we had each class is significant. They have their things. Our class in our company was very gifted in that our first class, while they weren't slack, they were sticklers for doing it right. They did everything with the class to build company class unity. Everything was done to build that teamwork. Didn't matter which one of the firsties you were doing coming around to or being taught. Put that in
Quotes.
yeah, in quotes. The whole thing was done. If you screwed up, everybody paid for it.
Okay.
Okay, so you had to support your classmates. They had to support you. And as I watched the next two classes, 64 and 65, they had a different style.
Okay.
And a lot of the other companies had different styles. The 8th company, and there was a connection between the 8th company and I was in the 12th at that time. 8th company, almost half of my classmates dropped out plebe year because the hazing was very, very, it was overboard. Even the company officer made. We had a fantastic company officer all the way along.
Good.
So during the summers at the Naval Academy, you went to training for the branches of the service. We spent 2 weeks in Little Creek learning what the Marines did, crawling through the mud and the sand and how to fire a rifle. Of course, we fired the rifle plebe summer. I qualified as an expert with the pistol, rifle and pistol. I had a little more trouble with the rifle, but mainly because I shot somebody else's target instead of mine. But learned how to handle both of those. And then we went on a summer cruise in the Atlantic. We went from Norfolk to Florida to New York and Quebec and then back to Norfolk. And that summer I went home.
Okay.
In August, spent August, and then flew back to start my 3rd class year. The next, after I made the baseball team that year. I played in a couple games, mostly JV, but I played baseball for 3 years there. Then at the end of our 3rd class year, we went to Pensacola. Because I was on the baseball team, I had my leave first in June, and then in July, I flew back 4th of July. And we had certain training, meteorology and computer science, and one other, I don't remember those two. We learned how to do the punch cards, because that's the kind of computers we had in 1963 and 4. Okay. So...
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your next roommate?
My roommates, my 3rd class year, one was from Hawaii and the other was an exchange student from Peru, Ed Lorette de Mola. And he and I were roommates that year, and then he roomed with somebody else for part of the next year, and then my roommate and I started butting heads, and he and his roommate started butting heads, just grinding on. So Ed and I moved back in together, and we roomed again 1st class year. And we managed to stay out of most trouble, but not, we like to bend the rules a little bit. We had a bunch of interesting things happen while during that year. There was a problem with, as you know, Venezuela's a problem now. Okay, Venezuela was a somewhat basket case then. Somehow, one of the midshipmen, another exchange student from Venezuela, somehow, probably with the CIA help, managed to get weapons and ammunition on board the USS Boston, in Boston, and offloaded in Puerto Rico, that ended up going to the guerrillas in Venezuela. Okay, so we had every foreign national had their rooms bugged by the FBI or NIS or something. So we had to watch what we said. Not that anybody that I knew was personally involved, but it was just one of those things. And the kid graduated.
Mm.
He was 2 years junior to us. He ended up graduating, and it was a clever story.
Yeah.
But we ended up finding out that our room was bugged.
Wow.
So one of
And
those
you
things.
stayed friends with your roommate?
Yes.
for-
And I've been to the 20th, 30th, 40th, and 50th reunion. So the 60th is coming in 3 more years.
Oh my God.
God willing, we'll both be there.
Wow.
But
Good.
yeah. So when I graduated, I told Judy about this month is when all of the seniors at the Naval Academy are selecting their first duty assignments. It happened to us on 100th night, which was, because we graduated in June, was in February. This year they're graduating in May. And a couple of friends have grandkids that are at the academy now, and they were making their selection. The one wants to be a Marine, so he put in to go to the Marines. The Marine Corps screens all of the midshipmen that want to go. So I'm certain he got his selection, knowing his grandfather. He's sharp, very, very sharp guy. So if he wants to be a Marine, he'll be a Marine.
So on 100th night, what was your selection? What did you?
I wanted to go aviation, but the flight surgeon said I couldn't because I was too heavy. The weight standard for my height was 170. I was 168. But he said, if you want to be a pilot, you got to be 150 something
Oh, gee.
for your height. Later on, I found out he was wrong. The best pilots are chunkier. The greatest aces in World War II, Japanese, Russian, German, English, were all 5'7" to 5'10" and a little bit overweight. Just gives you a better feel. Whatever it is, it does. But anyhow, I ended up going surface line.
So what did
Ta-
that? Oh yeah.
So I went to a destroyer.
Okay.
The officers that were our company officers and instructors, I talked to for some guidance, and they said, you don't want to go to a ship that's deployed. Go to one, get yourself on the ship, get familiar with the ship, get in the training pipeline to get all your qualifications. So pick a ship that's going to deploy in 5 or 6 months. So I picked the USS Brain, which was a Fletcher class destroyer out of San Diego, because I wanted to be out of San Diego. I decided on a Fletcher class because I had been on the Luce on my 3rd class cruise, and it was very, very stuffy.
Oh.
The wardroom wasn't friendly. When I went to the USS Boswell for my 1st class cruise, they were characters. They were, and it was a super friendly, cohesive wardroom. So I took the Brain and I walked aboard, and it was a party ship. It was, everyone was extremely professional, but they just, when you weren't on the ship, they partied. And of course, we're in Mission Beach, and there are parties going on Mission Beach even today.
Right.
It's a party place. So I came aboard on a Wednesday. They were ending a midshipman cruise. They went to sea the following Monday for the last week of the cruise, came back in, and we were told we're going back out to sea the following Monday.
Oh.
We got some reserves aboard. We're going out for another exercise. We're supposed to be out for 2 weeks. We were out there a week, and we got emergency orders. The ship to go back to port, load out, repair everything. We're deploying the 1st of September. So we came back in, took care of I had my nice new car. I think I took it up to the city and left it with my mother, and we deployed.
So you didn't get the time you wanted to get to know the ship, really, or?
No, it was cut a little short.
Okay.
But, I had blended into the wardroom.
Oh, good.
Of note, the bull ensign when I reported aboard was George Waters. Who's George Waters? Nobody knows. Then I found out his name was George Patton Waters.
Oh, okay.
And his grandfather was George Patton.
Wow.
So.
He went Navy, though.
Yeah, his brother he refused to go to West Point. He had an appointment.
Oh, but he did.
Yeah. So his father was a 4-star general, the commander of the U.S. Army in the Pacific on the SINCPAC staff. So the famous sea story of the ship was that they pulled into Pearl Harbor expecting to be the 5th ship outboard in front of the Officers Club. 6 o'clock in the morning, before they're pulling in on the midshipman cruise that was just ending, they got told they're the pierside ship at the farthest end in the prime seat.
Ooh.
The catbird seat right alongside the pier. They're getting the lines doubled up and the sister ship tying up alongside when all hell breaks loose at the front gate of the naval station there, because shares the gate with Hickam. Hickam's this way,
Yeah.
and the Pearl Harbor gate's here. All the Marines go flying out there, and they're in their camis, or not camis then, it was just the stateside greens. And they come in, they're all dressed in the full dress uniform with the blue pants and the red stripe.
Mm-hmm.
Next thing you know, the staff car comes through the gate and everybody's saluting, and the staff car's flying a 4-star red flag on it. Comes down, pulls up, and Pat's dad gets out, comes up. There's bells ringing all over the place. So the CO and the XO had no idea.
Yeah, no idea.
Pat knew what it was. He came down one side. The captain and the XO came flying down the other side of the ship. And the general says, gets all the salutes and says, "Yes, I'm here to see my son." And he salutes him and says, "Hi, Dad."
Oh, gosh.
So when we deployed, we went to Hawaii, and the general had retired by then. We were at the end of September, but we got the current general and his sergeant arranged for the wardroom to have one of the beach houses there at Fort DeRussy. So
Nice.
for our week while we were in for repairs, we stayed there and partied a little bit. But we went on from there. I happened to be the coach of the softball team, and I ended up breaking a leg and getting it put in a walking cast. But they decided to keep me on board, so I made the deployment, went all the way out to Westpac, went to Yokosuka, and then followed a carrier down to Yankee Station, chased her around for a little bit. Then we got assigned to what they called Sea Dragon, where we were patrolling the 5 miles just from the Benhai River north into North Vietnam as an interdiction of whatever, anything moving on the beach, like military gear, or any ship or seaborne traffic. We were there about 4 days, and we were heading south. We broke for lunch at 11 o'clock, and we came under fire. As I told Judy, our mess deck was two decks down, but they lined the chow line on the port side. The beach was on the starboard side. Everybody standing in line. I took a break from my general quarters station. I was talking with the DCA on the starboard side beneath the 3-inch gun mount. And we heard boom, boom, boom. Didn't see anything. What the hell are we firing? And then I turned around and looked and saw the plume of water going 100 feet in the air. And I made a beeline down across the quarterdeck. as I was coming, I yelled for my people to close the hatch on the quarterdeck, and I went around to the one on the port side, the one away from the beach, right?
Right.
So another round landed off the port side just as I was scooting in, and a piece of shrapnel hit my cast. Of course, it's solid cast. You know, might as well have hit the wall. As far as I never felt anything hit. Just one of the guys said, something hit you. Oh, okay. I later had that, but I don't know where it went after that. But we fired almost all the bullets we had on the ship at the beach. What we hit, who knows? But we made them know that they got answer in kind.
Yeah.
Nothing ever hit us. Nothing hit the Perkins. I believe there's a picture, again, in nav source under the USS Brain, showing us it going from 8 to 30 knots in a minute and a half. Black smoke, white water. It's a great picture.
Took off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the highlight of the cruise. We, after we finished that, we had a couple days R&R in Kaohsiung. Went back to the Yankee Station.
Where was Yankee Station about?
Yankee Station was about 60 miles east of the DMZ.
Okay.
Right at the entrance to the Gulf of Tonkin.
Okay.
And that was where the carriers would steam encircle and send their sorties into North Vietnam.
Okay.
So there were normally about 4 destroyers with each carrier, and one would be in plane guard anytime they're in flight operations 1,000 yards astern of the carrier. We were there for a couple days, and then the carrier swapped the Enterprise, and escorted by the Long Beach came out of Japan, and they were rather significant. We tracked them as they were coming in. They stayed together for about a day and a half. Then we got assigned to go with the Long Beach up to what they call the PIRAS station. There were various ships. All of the missile ships had a station up there where they checked out all the aircraft coming back from sorties to make sure that no aircraft could get to the carriers. So positive aircraft identification zone. So Long Beach had no guns. All she had was missiles. During the middle of that cruise, they took her into Japan, for 2 weeks, and put the guns on. But we were riding shotgun for her. So we were up there, and then we were heading back south when we got relieved, and we hit a storm just right, and we had to pull into Da Nang. We broke a little piece of the bilge keel, just when we were talking about the cruise liners, they're stabilized. Okay, right. There's a little piece of metal like this, like a fin, just add a little extra stabilization to the very long and thin Fletcher class destroyer. So we broke a piece of that off. We went to Da Nang, had a diver look at it, said, no, you're going to have to go get a tender to weld it. There's nothing we can do here. So they went into Subic and at a later date and had it fixed. But
so what was your job when you were on these ships that you've been talking about?
I was the electrical officer on the Brain, and then I fleeted up to the main propulsion assistant, responsible for the boilers and the turbines, all the propulsion power on the ship.
Okay.
So,
good.
I left the Brain in December the 8th of '67. We came back. I flew back because my dad died December the 8th of '66. I came back for the funeral. I was in school until the ship got back in March. And then we went on a midshipman cruise that summer.
Were you in San Diego?
From San Diego.
Yeah.
We were homeported in San Diego.
Okay.
Desron 21 and Desdiv 212. And then we went into the yard in Mare Island. The entire division went in. 2 of them went into Long Beach. one went to Hunters Point, and we went to Mare Island. So we had our 3-month yard period. At the end of the yard period, I transferred from the ship, had about 3 weeks of leave, and then reported to the amphibious school for duty in Vietnam. We had 12 weeks of training. They tried to teach us a little rudimentary Vietnamese.
Oh.
It's it's a tonal language, much kind of like Chinese. It's modeled off of that, but it's different, and none of us picked it up very well. Even the people that went to DLA up in Monterey still had trouble. Yep. So after 12 weeks, we flew out of Travis. There were about 50 of us in the class. So we flew out of Travis and then reported to Naval Forces Vietnam in Saigon. 2 days of orientation, and they issued us some extra uniforms. And I went up to Da Nang because I was in Coastal Group 11, which was at the mouth of the Qua Viet River, 4 miles south of the Ben Hai, which is the 16th parallel, the division line between North and South Vietnam. So I reported to Coastal Group 11. Sandy Stoddard was the senior advisor. He had been company commander of in class of 63. We were on the 3rd deck when I was a midshipman. He was on the 4th deck. So I knew him from that, and we had a great year. Everybody I served with, both on the brain and there, were extremely professional. Really, really sharp people, enlisted or officers.
So what was your job at this location?
I was the assistant advisor. We worked with the Vietnamese officers and the Vietnamese Navy. Their duty was to protect the civilians going up and down the river from the villages along the Tak Han or the Qua Viet River, going up to Dong Ha, which is the local commercial hub. It was also the support hub for all of the Marines in Upper I Corps. So the people up at Con Tien, C4, and all those, the Marines had established the High Point base at Con Tien, and then they had small outposts with observation towers all along the DMZ, maybe a mile in. But so they 50-foot wooden towers.
So they needed those supplies, the food.
Right.
Okay.
All of the food would come up by LCU or LST from Da Nang, and then it would be transshipped from the LST ramp at Qua Viet, the NSAD, Naval Support Activity Detachment, Qua Viet, supported the ramp. They had the big rough terrain fork trucks. They had a big concrete ramp, and the ships would come in, offload cargo, and then be loaded on LCM-8s, or they had 1 or 2 YFUs or older style landing craft, LCTs, and they would run them up to Dong Ha and offload it.
So what were your quarters like at this time?
We about 2 years before, when they first started the program, the advisors had lived in a hooch, in a, I guess, cinder block building on a concrete pad. The base we were at, the junk base, had been a French base during the
Their
war in
occupation.
'54. Yeah. So, and it was set up as a nice little compound. Had a couple bunkers there where been machine gun bunkers if they'd ever been attacked. And then they had 6 junks, 4 Yabutas and 2 command junks. The command junks were built in Vietnam. The Yabutas, the U.S. Navy built in Japan for them to a very nice design, decided by everybody. They're all wooden. They had General Motors diesels in them. They ran very well. The command junks could do about 10 knots. The Yabutas could crank it up maybe to 8. It had a little smaller engine, but it ran well.
And so you were supporting the Vietnamese Navy that would run those
Right.
vessels.
They
Okay.
would normally have one junk on patrol, checking out all the fishermen to make sure that somebody didn't come down in a fishing boat. Because it was only, when you went out, you were heading northeast. So if you went out 2 miles, you could almost you were almost in North Vietnamese waters.
Yeah.
So somebody could sneak a little boat out of the Ben Hai, could bring stuff over and bring it back.
Yeah.
So, but there was always a junk patrolling. They checked out that everybody was safe, and that nobody was going to come down and shoot them up either. That was another possibility. And it was a defense in depth along the coast there. Market time consisted of that defense in depth. You had the junk forces along the coast from us at top of I Corps all the way through 2, 3, and 4 Corps up to the Cambodian border.
Mm.
Outboard of the junks were the swift boats, and they kind of overlapped their territory. And then outboard of those, in smaller numbers, were the Coast Guard cutters. We had an 82-foot Coast Guard cutter, and then outboard of that, you had the naval gunfire destroyers and the cruisers.
Mm.
We almost always had an 8-inch gun cruiser there. The St. Paul, the Boston, the Canberra, the Newport News came over later, but they were all there. And
So
then,
how
of
many
course, the New Jersey.
How many Americans were in the camp with you there?
There were 4 of us.
There were only 4 of you.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a senior advisor, the junior advisor, an engineman, and a bosun mate.
Okay.
The engineman would help do the maintenance on the junks, keep those going. And we had a generator that provided all the power. Now, we had a wooden hooch about 50 foot long, and four little bedrooms, and a big common room with a little cook stove and refrigerator. We maintain radio guard 24 hours a day.
Oh, gosh.
So everybody got 3 or 4 days a month in Da Nang. So mine was always the end of the month. The 2 enlisted had the first 2 weeks of the month. Then the senior advisor, all the senior advisors would meet on about the 20th of the month, between the 15th and the 20th, with the zone commander, the corps commander, and they would get the briefing on what was all the politics coming down, all of the instructions either way, and then after he was back a couple days, then I would get a couple days off. So I would go down. I'd either ride a swift boat, or I'd go up to Dong Hai and get a hop. I flew in 4 or 5 different helicopters. You know, you see the bubble that they use in MASH. I flew in one of those once,
Oh, gosh.
and then got out of Dong Hai to Da Nang on an Air America CIA F-27, and that was an interesting couple days. Then we'd spend a couple days down in Da Nang, just relaxing, mainly drinking, unfortunately. But I mean, that's got to know the Coast Guard better. As I told her, the usual end of the evening was eggs on the Doom. The Point Doom was one of the 82-foot cutters, and they had a fantastic baker. So he baked the bread for who's ever in the nest for that day. They would go on about a week's patrol, then they'd have a couple days off, and they would go north. They would rotate all the stations all the way down to the Second Corps border. So, but got to know all those guys. And of course, the other junior advisors would float in and out. We'd get to know each other.
At some
See how
point,
they-
you told me you met Lieutenant John McCain.
Oh,
Was that before or after?
now
I'm sorry.
that was during the summer between my sophomore and junior year. My
Oh, at
third
the
class
academy? Okay.
we went to aviation training, and each of us got a dozen flights or more. And John McCain was the officer in charge of my summer group. There's other officers that had the June and the July groups, but he was the one in charge of the August group. So we got indoctrinated to all the joys of naval aviation.
So you felt like you had picked the right course for your naval career after that?
Oh yeah, it was right for me because, unfortunately, if I sit too long, I fall asleep. So I could not imagine me trying to fly a single-engine, single-seat airplane on a 5-hour mission. I would get bored and I would fall asleep. So God was looking after me.
There you go. So there in this camp, about how many Vietnamese soldiers were there with you, or Navy?
Okay, the junk base had about 100 people. So there were the crews of the 8 junks. So there's usually a 4-man crew, and then there's a maintenance crew of about a dozen, a land patrol team that varied between 20 and 30, and then a few other support people. And we were at the northern end.
Okay.
Then the command area and the parade ground, and the barracks there, and then beyond that there was another open area before the minefield and the gate where the dependents lived.
Oh gosh, they had their dependents.
And the ducks and chickens and dogs. And the CO of the base had a dog that was a Doberman. And then there's a mangy old mutt.
Oh.
But he was the father of the Doberman. He was part Doberman, part Shepherd. He had about 4 bullet holes in him. But he was the king of the roost. And those dogs roamed around, and they were good guard dogs. You didn't want to mess with them. But
so how did you eat? There wasn't like a mess then, or
the Vietnamese had a mess for their people, and we would eat dinner with them every night.
Okay.
All 4 of the advisors with the command staff, and excellent food. Fish and rice and fresh veggies and chicken. Very, very good food. We also had a Marine intelligence officer that operated for the colonel up in Quang Tri City. And he was to support us, and he supported the 2 guys in the Way area. But Bob Pulot would come down. He would spend about a week with us, but it'd be 2 days here, 2 days there. Maybe drop in for a couple hours and then take off again. But he was always conducting liaison between the Marines up in the west and the Marines there was a Marine base just outboard of the NSAD. They had a battalion of Amtraks.
Okay.
And they had House 6s, or 105 millimeter truck mounted on an Amtrak, howitzers. Okay. My introduction up there, I didn't sleep for the first 4 days because all through the night there's naval gunfire offshore. There's the House 6s firing in support of their people, sometimes just firing star shells so that the guys at their OP right on the coast could see what was happening in the wire. Of course, I got there a month and a half after Tet. Tet was the end of January, and we got there in early April. So Tet wound down around the 1st of March, so when I got there it was about 6 weeks later. And it was pretty hairy up there. we had an incident where our land patrol, the junks, took them over and landed on the North Shore. This was before I got there, but there was a lot of repercussions for it while I was in my first couple of months there. They got ambushed. My predecessor was at the base. All three of the enlisted, because they were making a changeover between the enginemen. There were 2 enginemen and 1 bosun mate. They went out with the land patrol. They got about 50 feet off the beach and ran into a dug-in battalion. Our people were very good, and the others were not. The NVA was not that good. So they had one guy that had a croix de guerre. He'd worked for the French. He'd gotten that for combat related, and he was fine. They said he could take an M79 grenade launcher, and he could hit a target 200 yards away.
Wow.
And he would fire it from the hip, and he could hit whatever. He had it down pat. They said he got a Bronze Star out of that. The corpsman, the Vietnamese corpsman, got a Silver Star. The 2 of the advisors that got wounded both got Bronze Stars, and the other one got a Navy Commendation and a promotion to chief. So,
And a Purple Heart, I'm sure.
Well, he was the one that wasn't wounded.
Oh, he was the one that wasn't.
The ones
Okay.
got the Purple Heart, they got the Bronze Star. He pulled 2 of them out.
Oh.
I mean, he was the littlest of the 3. So little Puerto Rican, about my height, about 5'6", 5'7", 125 pounds, dripping wet.
Oh.
And the other guy was about 220 pounds, and the third one was about 180. That when they got shot, he's the one that pulled them back to safety, and then the corpsman patched them up, patched his people up. I don't think any of the Vietnamese were killed. About 8 of them were wounded. They got them out. My predecessor called in naval gunfire, and he's calling it right on their position, and it was hitting, just drove the NVA back. And they got everybody off the beach.
Okay.
So, but we had some incidents, nothing major. Could have been major, but we had the river went up and then made a 90-degree turn, went up to Quang Tri City, but then the creek that came through Dong Ha came in, and right at that junction, we got called out in the middle of the night. There were people running around, so nobody knew what it was, so we went up to see what was going on, and I guess some fishermen were out putting their stakes in, but it's pitch black.
Yeah, you don't know.
And you just saw the people. So we're up there trying to figure out what it was. We saw somebody running, and 2 of us fired. We shot one guy in the foot. We ended up medevacing him out. But we had star shells going off above us, and I'm standing there where you are, 6 feet away. The weight, the star shell is a normal 5-inch or whatever size round. It's got a parachute flare, and it's got a weight in there that pulls the parachute flare out. Well, that weight has to fall somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
So we found out who we had. We got the fisherman, got him medevac, got him patched up. We took him all the way down to our junk base and got him fixed up some. I don't remember now whether we sent him to a hospital ship or whether the Marines patched it. But we got the hell out of Dodge, because these things are falling around us. We had to keep the star shell so we could see where we were.
Right.
You're on a sandbar in the middle of a river. Okay. So anyhow, that was one of our big incidents. We had a few other little ones, but over Thanksgiving and Christmas, just before Thanksgiving, we had a typhoon come through, and they got in trouble at our sector on the south side of the river. The Army had a post, and Major Shalikashvili, who became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was the advisor there. He called for help because it's a gully, and the water was rising. He was 50 feet from the river's edge, and the water was up to the steps of his hooch.
Oh boy!
So one of the junks went in and rescued him and his team, but it was coming up there and lost power because the debris in the water blocked his exhaust from his engine, shut the engine down. So they banged into the hooch, got the people aboard. One of the people on board went and pulled the debris out of it, restarted the engine, and then got him out. So and then Christmas, I was home alone with the Vietnamese, and a bunch of them had left, but they had midnight mass in the building next to our hooch, and as I told Judy, they came in with bamboo and brown paper and created this fantastic manger scene. And then the local priest came down and he said mass at midnight for all of the Catholics that were there.
Yeah.
And we had a packed house.
Oh.
So
Nice.
So it was made for a very interesting Christmas. The rest of all the other advisors were up in Quang Tri City at the Christmas party that the Army colonel in charge threw with his Vietnamese counterparts. And they're walking around Quang Tri City singing Christmas carols in the middle of the war.
Yeah.
So that was kind of one of the dichotomies of what was going on in that war in the various modes.
Need that relief.
Yeah. But
Did your you mentioned too that your Vietnamese chief had gotten married?
The lieutenant who was in command of the coastal group, when I arrived, he was in Hue with his family getting married. And about a week or so after I got back, I got there, he came back with his new bride. And they moved into the building right next to our bunker. It was a 2-story storehouse. They made a nice little apartment for them down there. Well, they're there about a month, and we had gone out in our Boston Whaler and chased some stuff down from the base, and then gone in for a swim because it was 95 degrees, 90% humidity. But you know, the rivers are in Asia and most of the rest of the world. I mean, you go to Europe, even here, the sewage system goes into the river and washed down. Okay, so we weren't taking a shower. The lieutenant got his shower and was drying off on his, just going out the door as I was getting ready to go turn the water on and wash off when we got incoming artillery. They had H&I fire. We'd get it at 6 in the morning sometime around lunch and to say good night. So we grabbed a towel, and 2 of us made a beeline and had kind of a zigzag path like that. We had a bunker with 15 or 16 rows of sandbags with some PSP in between. But it was only about this deep inside there. So we went down the slide and we're just squatting in there when just got turned around and she comes sliding in, pulling her pants up. And so we're sitting there, everything's out in the breeze.
Oh.
And she was one hand pulling her pants up and the other one pulling a blouse on. So everybody got a free peek. But
Nobody was hurt.
No, nobody was hurt.
Just
Her husband had bailed out, and there was a zigzag trench that went around to the front of the compound there, the admin building. So he got in that trench and had run over there. And the chief was down on the pier, and we just put in this beautiful nice wooden pier. The old pier was rickety with bamboo stilts and held together by baling wire and vines. So this was, like railroad ties. That just finishing it off, that first round came in, he was in the water, uniform and all.
Oh gosh.
But everybody came out of it all right. It was just a couple rounds, 4 or 5 rounds. But that's all they would do. It's just nothing was meant to, if they hit something important, that was all right. It's just to make everybody die for the bunker.
Know that they were there.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about the Marines and I Corps, and I've heard to an extent that Marines do not eat canned apricots.
Huh.
So there's a little history in that. During the end of the Tet Offensive, they were serving apricots at the Cantienne Mess Hall at the luncheon meal. H&I Fire took out the galley. Just landed right in the building. Nobody was, as far as I know, nobody was killed. A couple people were injured. I mean, the first rounds didn't hit the galley, so everybody was bailed for the bunkers, but it took it out. The Quaviette Mess Hall, the Navy side, they were serving canned apricots for dessert, for lunch. Direct hit. Again, nobody was, everybody bailed after the first round, and then the second round happened to hit the mess hall. And then it happened the third time at Dong Ha, at one of the mess halls there. You could go into the market in Quang Tri, in Dong Ha, in parts of Da Nang, Chu Lai, or any of the places where the Army was, and around Army of the Marines were, you would see sea rats. All, the Vietnamese market, they would have their fish heads and their chickens and their veggies, but there'd be cans. And you'd see all of the sea rat cans, except there would be one that would be this high, and maybe 2 or 3 all canned apricot.
Pretty
So
superstitious, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
I guess, it was not without justification.
You want to tell us about, during your time in Vietnam, how your rank went and any medals that you had earned, how those came about?
Yeah, I was an ensign on board the Brain, and I made JG the day that I checked out, 1.5 years after graduation. So that was moved up for Vietnam. And then when I completed my tour in Vietnam and got to the MO ship, they announced that they moved ahead the promotions to lieutenant, so I was made lieutenant on the 30th of June in 1969. So I was there. I got a Navy Commendation Medal for my service in Vietnam with a Combat V, and I later got a star for later service in the reserves. Normal ribbons for National Defense Service ribbon. Well, I got that while I was at the academy. My rifle, my pistol expert, and I requalified later. Vietnam service, both the 2 Vietnamese ribbons plus the U.S. Vietnam Service Medal. I was in Vietnam after they shifted from the Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal to the Vietnam Service, so I never got the Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal. I later got a Korean Service Medal for my time being called up for the nuclear crisis in '95. So I have a total of, I think, 13 or 14 ribbons.
Nice.
But
So
But
before you left Vietnam, did you were able to go on R&R to Australia?
yes,
Will
I
you tell
flew to
us?
Australia, and there's a gentleman who was at one time the General Secretary of the Australian PGA, and he was in Navy terms, the XO of the 1956 Olympic committee. So I had the pleasure of spending a day with him in Sydney. Very, very nice gentleman named Jim Eve, and he of the family was about 12, and for a while there they lived in San Francisco. They went to Australia, then whatever happened, they came to San Francisco for a couple of years, and they were next door neighbors of my grandfather and his sisters when their parents died. So the Eves helped them out while they got their feet on the ground. My great aunt, the oldest one, was 15 when both her parents died, a year apart. I think my great grandmother died in complications of childbirth, and my great grandfather was a carpenter, and he fell and succumbed from injuries from the fall. He was up on a scaffold and fell off. So that happened 50 years before I was born, so you get bits and pieces of the family history.
So you got to spend a week in Sydney.
Yeah.
Got your time.
Got to do a little touring around. I learned not to drink too much Australian beer.
Oh.
It's much stronger than ours, and even much stronger than the Vietnamese beer.
Wow.
I had no trouble drinking Vietnamese beer, but that was another story. But yeah, Foster's that you get, you can buy Foster's here, and it's the same as drinking Budweiser or anything else. But the Foster's you get in Australia, it will kick you in the butt a lot faster than you think, and it goes down smooth. Okay. When I left Vietnam, I was home for a couple weeks and then flew back to try and pick up the ship. I flew into Da Nang, but I missed it, and so I finally got it about the 5th or 6th of June in '69 in Subic Bay. We went over to Manila for a port call. All of the ships were scheduled to go in there as they were getting ready to close down Sangley. So while they had Sangley still operational and Cavite partially operational, the Navy made regular calls there. After that, almost never went to, other than Subic, we never went to Manila. And then we went out to do our normal thing. So we would have 2-week line swings. We'd load up with a full load of ammunition, the full deck cargo. We'd leave 10 o'clock at night and to be on station at midnight 2 days later. And the carriers were on an operating schedule. They'd operate from noon to midnight if there were two, and midnight till noon. So we would always get there as the one came off of the shift that ended at midnight. They would come alongside of us. We would be alongside of them for 5.5 to 6 hours, transfer 5 stations just as fast as we could transfer the ammunition. Then we'd get a destroyer come alongside, take a little bit of 5-inch rounds, and then we'd break away, take a break for chow, and head over to the coast. And if one of the northern gunfire ships needed ammunition, we'd rearm them. We'd putt down the coast 6 or 8 knots and catch a replenishment as the other ships needed it, then come back up about 6 days later, offload the rest of the carrier ammunition, all the bombs and the fins and the rockets, whatever they needed, go back down the coast for a couple days, and then back into Subic.
So when you're saying coast, you're talking about Vietnam.
Right. We'd
You're
go.
still.
Normally we wouldn't go south beyond Quinyon, which is the northernmost of the two core ports. So we just stay in that vicinity, so that if the carrier had a big raid, needed more quickly, we could be back up there.
So when the ships come side by side like that, how do you get the ammunition from one ship to the next? What does that
Okay.
look like?
The replenishing ship comes alongside. If it's a destroyer, we would fire a shot line over, and we'd attach the heavier cables and put a rig on a block and tackle on the ship. It would attach to a fitting on the ship, and then we would run the cargo on that trolley back and forth. If the carrier came alongside, they would fire the shot lines.
They were higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The destroyers, excuse me.
Take a minute.
No, the destroyers normally, I'm going to grab this.
Yeah.
The destroyers normally
Well,
come
don't
in.
talk while you wait, because we want to hear this part.
The destroyers normally come in at 100 feet. The carriers try and come in between 150 and 200 feet, then slide in closer. But they would fire the cables over, the shot line over, and then we would attach our span wire back to them, and then we would run the trolley back and forth. Now normally with the slack wire rigs, now they have special high tension rigs, but the span wire rigs, we could run a pallet every 30 seconds.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Our people were really good. Dumber than bricks, but handling the ammunition and handling the winches, just absolutely first rate. They were the best in the fleet.
Oh, good.
We held the record until somebody stole it from us.
Ah.
Just to know, we normally there are 5 stations on an ammo ship, and they transfer the bulk of the stuff goes in the first 4. The specialty stuff, like if you're transferring bombs to the carrier, the 5th station is where you ship the more hazardous stuff.
Okay.
The fuses, the flares, the fins, because all the bombs have to have fins on them.
Yeah.
Okay, so all of that stuff goes in the last one. Well, people that stole the record from us, they transferred all the fins for 2 unreps on one unrep. Then all they transferred were all of the bombs on the other one. So, I mean,
Didn't play fair.
well, you play it any way you can to set the record. I mean, our guys just did it because they were that good. And I made 2 cruises on that, and we outshone everybody.
So how long were you on that ship then?
I was on it for 2 years. I came aboard in June of '69. I left in April of '71. She was decommissioned in January of '71, and finally completely shut down the end of April. I had a class to attend in Key West early in April, so I checked out between the 5th and the 10th. Got in my car and sped across country to Key West and was there for 6-7 weeks.
How were you keeping in touch with family all this time?
While I was in Vietnam, I wrote at least 2 letters a night.
Oh.
We were on watch 24 hours a day, so you had the night watch. You had to stay awake. We had about every hour we'd have a radio check just to make sure everybody was alive. And we had some crazy call signs, and they would rotate sometimes 2 and 3 times a month because they thought they were compromised. Well, they were compromised the first time you came on the net because they could tell my voice. They could tell the sergeant from Brooklyn by his voice. They had a Southern major up at Cam Low, and they had Shalikashvili with that Russian European, he was a Georgian, so that Russian type accent, and one of the other guys had a very significant accent. So you knew which station was talking.
So you had time on your hands to write letters?
So I would write letters and just, scribble down what we'd done the day, and all during the night watch, just to make sure that you stayed awake. We'd walk around the whole compound, trying not to disturb everybody, and people sleeping in their hooches, and we'd go down a kind of perimeter walk where we could walk all the way around, and it was about 15 minutes or so to walk all the way around the compound just to make sure everything looked all right. And there were Vietnamese sentries that manned the gate, and they would walk around a little bit. You'd see them, and of course the dogs would chase you, not to harass you, just there's somebody moving, I'm going to see who it is. So come back and note what you saw.
So were you getting letters from family as well, or
right.
Girlfriends, or?
Yep.
Yeah.
The chief wasn't married, I wasn't married, the lieutenant was married, and the bosun mate was married. So they got their family letters, and we would get the mail would come in either in an 01 or they would come in a helo. The 01s would come over and come in real low and throw it out the window from the back seat. So we'd chase it down out in the sand there. Normally they were pretty good, hit right between our hooch and the outhouse.
Wow.
So it was about 50 feet from the hooch to the outhouse.
And you knew it was coming. I mean,
yeah. We'd be talking on the radio. And,
okay,
it's coming. And so we'd go out. When we had a visitor coming in or we had a medevac coming in, we would throw smoke grenades out there so that the helos could see by the drift of the smoke where the wind was blowing, so they could come into the wind to get a good landing. Well, that sand dune where we were had spots of grass, just like up on the hill here, clumps of grass. Well, when you throw the smoke grenade out, it would quite often start the little tufts of grass on fire. So you got the guy coming in, you didn't want a fire going, so throw it out there, and I'd go out and stamp out the fire. Well, I wore flip-flops. I didn't wear my combat boots. My feet didn't like it being cut, and they warned us not to, when we got over there, not to get your feet all sweaty and in that boot all the time so that you had problems. So you wear flip-flops, it dries out. Especially if you're in the sand, it pretty much kept it going for me. So I'm out there in flip-flops trying to put these things out, and I'd end up burning my foot a little bit. I said, well, that's what you get for not wearing boots. That's all right. I won't wear boots. But we had a couple instances of that. Everybody'd laugh at me. But that was it.
So you got mail.
Yeah.
So when you drove to Key West, you were in school for 6 weeks. What were you learning there?
I was getting ready. I had orders to San Nicolas Island, to the naval facility out there. At that time, it was a SOSA station.
Just tell us what the SOSA stands for. What is that about?
Sound surveillance system. So it was developed at the end of World War II, and in conjunction with Western Electric, which was a development arm of the phone company. And so they developed it from the end of World War II to where they set up the first stations on the East Coast in the late 40s, early 50s. They came out here around 1958, 59 and set up the Western stations. And they were at San Nicolas Island, Big Sur, Eureka, Coos Bay, and Pacific Beach, in Washington. And so they taught us how to understand what the hell we were looking at, because it was an optical presentation of the signature of the propellers of any kind of a vessel. And they're set way down below the thermal layer. They're a couple 100 fathoms down. I don't know exactly. Each one's a little different, but they're significantly far out there. I later found out that my XO at the fib school, when I got there, had been the skipper of the cable layer that had put those cables in place when they were done. He'd done the bottom two stations here in Point Sur. So I got there at the end of July, or end of June of 1971. Yeah, end of June. A little sea story in that because everybody goes to San Nicolas Island on a charter airplane. Mercer had the charter, and they fly a DC-3 and a DC-6. So everybody got off on Fridays, except the people that stood watch 24/7. So my comm officer had been in my class with me in Key West, and he had turned in his wings. He was a pilot. He was dressed to do his final check flight to get his wings when his second roommate crashed in the swamp. So the three guys in a room, and two of them were dead. And he said, "I quit." He walked over at the wrong time. He waited 2 hours later, he'd have been fine. They'd have sent him home. But he walked over at the wrong time, so he got sent to San Nicolas Island for 2 years.
Oh.
So he's out there. He got there about a week, 10 days before me. And this was the first time flying back off the island. And we're standing there and waiting. No airplane. It's supposed to be there at 12. Then, do you know what a T-33 is?
No.
A Lockheed Shooting Star. This was a drone.
Oh, okay.
And it was a target. Somebody was chasing it around and locking the radars on it and trying to shoot a missile at it. Okay, they were done with it. They were trying to land it on the runway. Kept coming down. It'd get about this far off the wheels, this far off the runway, and they'd lose it and couldn't get it landed. They had to wait till they got it on the ground to bring Mercer in. So finally, after about 5 tries, they slammed it onto the runway, hits the runway, skids to one side, rolls and tumbles and goes over the cliff.
Oh, no.
And everybody starts cheering. The guys, the people that worked at the NAFAC, the enlisted that worked running the airstrip and the compound, and a bunch of the civilians that ran Vandenberg's radars, all cheering. And my comm officer's face is just as white as this sheet of paper.
Oh.
He said, "What kind of silly bastards am I working with? Here, this pilot just got killed." So the skipper comes over, puts his arm on. He says, "Dink, that's a drone. There's nobody on board."
Yeah.
Because it's painted. All of the planes in the training command had that bright international orange on them. This was an all-orange airplane. He said there was nobody on board. Now they can bring the plane in. So DC-6, that plane, 30 seconds after that plane tumbled over the edge, Mercer made the landing, and we came in here to Point Magoo.
So how long? So what did you do while you were on San Nicolas Island?
Well, I was
your
the
job?
operations officer. I was responsible for all of the people that read all the data and the radium and that transmitted all of the information that we passed on to Hawaii, who was our command. So they monitored everything that was going on in the Pacific, particularly what submarines that the Soviets had out there. So we monitored all that, and then since then, that basically, as far as I know, has gone away. They had a variation of it with the task ships later on, but whether it's still in operation, everybody's figured a way to get around it now.
Yeah,
It's
right.
70-year-old technology. But
Well, tell us a little bit about the island itself. What kinds of things did you do, when you were off duty and you didn't, what did they have there for you?
my people were on a 24-hour watch. So the coastal NAFAX and most of all the rest, which were in civilization, they were on a 2 and 80, 2 mids, 2 swings, and 2 day watches. My people had, because of the flight schedule, they were 7 days on, 3 days off, 7 days on, 4 days off, 5 days on, and then start again. So some variation of that theme. So they would come out, arrive at noon, do a swing shift, and then double back to the next day. And so they were there for their whole string. And all of the other officers, I had a comm officer and a division officer for the OTs. We would fill in, because I had 4 regular watch officers, but we always had to have extra. So we only had 2 sections on there, so we'd split it out, and there'd be 3 officers there on a weekend. So we would work our way through. And when I was off duty, I would run. That's when I started running.
Mm-hmm.
One of the guys there was a marathon runner.
Oh gosh.
And so he would run the whole around the airstrip. I got 2 miles in if I was lucky. But and we had a lot of stuff going on. They built the barracks for the officers. Was one of those prefab thin, like the school, the portable classrooms that they brought it, very thin aluminum. We're sitting up there, the wind would buffet it, the whole building would shake. When somebody would come in, especially some of the bigger guys, the XO of the air station, they had a CO and XO for the runway and all of the support equipment out there. He was about 6'4".
Oh gosh.
When he stepped in, there was kind of a wardroom or a TV room at one end and a little kitchenette. But their quarters were at the far end, and ours were right by the kitchenette in the common room. When he would come in down there, it would move the building. I mean, you could hear him hear anybody walking up and down the hall. But
you had a gym and...
Yeah, there was a gym there, and there was a movie theater, and there was a bowling alley. So, barber shop, bowling alley, and then the enlisted barracks were nice. They were about 100 yards away, and they had a compound. They normally about 350 military out there, and that would vary because they would have groups that come out for some special operations. They always had plenty of extra, and then there were civilian barracks there for all hundreds of technicians, because that whole island up in the height to the western side is at least 100 antennas.
Oh gosh.
And they had the civilians that patched the roads and paved the runway, and of course maintained all that. Mm-hmm. And then the northern end of the island was a target area. They had an old B-24 out there. But my comm officer went out there, and he had a picture of himself sitting in the pilot's seat, hanging out the window. So, but that stuff was out there. And then there was a carrier that was sunk off the northern end of the island. It was one of the commencement bay escort carriers,
Okay.
and it was used as a target.
Oh, okay.
So they fired missiles at it.
Oh.
But some of the guys would scuba dive. The skipper and the XO were both scuba divers. Some of the enlisted would dive with them. Some of the people like to fish. There's good fishing out there.
Right.
As you know, lobster season here in the Channel Islands is from October 15th till I think it's March or April 15th. Because the northern end of the island was missile impact locator. They had hundreds of hydrophones out there, so they could precisely tell where a missile or part of its components landed. So there's no fishing in there.
Oh, okay.
Well, the lobsters evolved just like deer evolved.
Oh.
Okay? So they knew when lobster season started, and they were in among all those hydrophones. And the lobstermen learned that too, so they would try and sneak in, throw their pots down. So constantly chasing them out of there, because you never knew what they were going to pull up and destroy. So they had many incidents. I don't think I'll go into any of them, but had fun and games with them.
So how long did you have? I'm sorry.
I was there for 2 years, and I would, I played a little basketball over here at Point Magoo on a couple of weekends that I was off. But other than that, learned how to play golf. So I had 2 of the troops there were scratch golfers. So we would get off the island on Friday, play 18 holes. Saturday play 36 holes, and Sunday play 18 holes.
Oh my goodness.
Well, it was a 9-hole course with 2 different sets of tees, so you're playing the same 9 twice, with a little longer, a little shorter. But it was fun.
And what was your next, or?
After 2 years there,
Okay.
I was transferred to the Naval Amphibious School at Coronado.
Okay.
I spent on and off the next 5 years there. I taught naval gunfire, and I was there 2 weeks, and I was out at San Clemente Island. So I went from one Channel Island to the other. And so we would teach the ships proper procedures for shooting naval gunfire from Mark 68 system, which was on the Forrest Sherman class, and the DDG-2 class ships. And of course the DLG, the Belknap class, the DLG 26 class, because they had a gun. The 16 to 24 didn't have any guns.
Oh, okay.
But we teach them how to fire naval gunfire, and once they had mastered it more or less in the classroom, we had a complete computer rig that showed where their guns were aimed according to their computer and where the shots would hit. So we had one instructor, one of the chiefs would teach the computer, and the lieutenant would teach them how to do the CIC procedures and get the team trained up. After they'd trained, then they would go back to the ship, and when they're scheduled, they would go out and do their formal 5 drills out on the island. Shortly after I was there, we had an incident, as I told Judy. I went out there, again, in my orientation on how to call. I called the USS Cook, firing on all of their 5 standard exercises. But we had an extra exercise for the 5-inch 54 ships where they could fire a wrap projectile. And it would fire out 25,000 yards and then drop vertically on whatever essentially the target was. More, again, an H&I type fire, because there's no accuracy that you could. So the Cook came out, fired a practice on that exercise, 100%. So it's, okay, we're going to do this for score. They fired all 10 rounds. Nobody ever saw where the bullets went. Well, They landed 10 miles east of San Clemente Island. What had happened is the jet stream, which we learned later on, had necked down so that it was at a fine point right east of right over San Clemente Island. So the bullets got no horizontal trajectory, but it's caught up there in 100-mile-an-hour winds, and it dragged it 10 miles out. And there's a guy with 2 swordfish on the hook, transiting down from Catalina in that channel, and these bullets are landing around.
Oh.
Goes in full panic, so he's calling the Coast Guard, calling the Navy. The Coast Guard called us, and when this was happening, I had already gotten back to the office in Coronado, and the boss was going bananas, and we didn't find out about the jet stream till watching the news that night. But and then later on, while I was out there, Cindy Williams and her friends tried to get rid of all of the goats on San Clemente Island. Well, they managed to corral about 10,000 goats and ship over 10,000 goats off the island. Well, when they started, there were 10,000 goats on the island. When they finally gave up the ghost, there were 10,000 goats on the island. When I first got there, if you saw a herd of goats, 1 or 2 nannies would be nursing, 1 or 2 would be pregnant. Once they started shipping them out, every nanny was pregnant every cycle, and they all had 2 kids. Used to bring home abalone from that, but got to be careful with it, because if you took it too early, then it would be spoiled by the time you got back. But we'd keep it on ice and get it. Had a feast on that a couple times, but I don't eat shellfish, but everybody else does. So, so I left the fib school in 1976 and went to Subic Bay on USNS Pasumsic as the officer in charge of the mill deck and communicator on the ship. And we were home ported in Subic. We roamed from the Philippines to Japan, and then all the way out to the Gulf. We went out to Karachi for midlink. So we were at sea most of the time. We'd be in port 2 or 3 days, and then we'd go.
Wow.
But we serviced all of the fleet. We were on an exercise called midlink, which was a combined exercise with the Brits, the Pacs, the Turks. Indians watched us. We were friends with the Indians. Okay. Just connecting some of the dots. When I reported to the fib school, I talked to the people about being on San Nic, and they wanted to go out there. So we had a pilot in our department. He got a U-11 and took 4 of us out. It's 4-seat Piper Comanche, I believe. Okay. So we flew out to San Nic, and it's the first time I've seen going into the runway at San Nic. It's up about 800 feet. And as you come in, on the U-11, we came in nice and low, and other times we'd drop out of the sky like that on Mercer. But as you come into the runway, looking at that hillside, it looks like a dartboard with darts stuck in it. There's the tails of a bunch of the drones that they lost control of trying to bring them in, and they just crashed in the hillside. All you've got are just like a dart, the tail feathers.
Oh my gosh.
But bright orange, and they're just stuck right into that hillside. Of course, that was, 50 years ago when I did it, but, they'd been flying the drones out there, and a couple of my guys were RC model airplane drivers. Right. The stuff that they were putting in those drones was so antiquated that's why they were having trouble landing them. Yeah. Because the ground effect was affecting it. They would lose control in that proximity. So the guys flying the RC were 2 generations or 3 generations
ahead.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and while I was out at San Nick, also the Western Electric came out and they were upgrading our equipment. And the guys that came out had the first HP calculators.
Oh gosh.
They were just developing them. 3 years later, or 5 years later, whatever it was, I was working for National Semiconductor, and we could buy a calculator that would do the same thing at about a quarter of the size
Right.
for $1, and they were paying $800 to $1,000 for them then.
Wow.
Just in that short time, complete change in
Technology.
technology.
Wow.
So, I mean, the world has changed fantastically since then.
Right.
But yeah, when I was on Pasumsic, we had a fantastic crew. I had a great bunch of sailors that worked for me. My yeoman had been on the Saturn Airlines plane that got shot down by the Russians. He was going to Vietnam. He was right out of boot camp, and they were on the Great Circle route coming into Japan, and the Russians came out and shot a bunch of bullet holes in the tail. The airplane got down into Japanese airspace, but he would have to get drunk to get on the airplane to go home.
I'll bet.
He tried to figure when he left the ship. See, he was there about 6 months when I got there.
Uh-huh.
And when he left the ship, he tried to finagle his way into riding one of the ships going back. But
So what was your last tour before you, was that your
just
last?
a personal side note, when I was on the Pasumsic, right before I left, we unrepped the Midway Battle Group, and we unrepped the USS Bossell, which was my first class midshipman cruise ship, for her last unrep in Westpac.
Oh.
So
That's a
she
big
was coming back to be retired. So she unrepped from us on her last exercise, went into Japan, refueled, and sailed back to San Diego. They decommissioned her, and she sat out here for about 6-7 years at Wainimi as a target ship.
Oh gosh.
But it was one of the unique little episodes of what I got to see. But I really enjoyed my 2 tours on the Paracutan and Pasumsic because we were busy all the time. Now, in peacetime, I had one of my good friends was on the Kiska after Vietnam and after all of that, and they were bored stiff because the very, very limited demand where we were busting butt all the time, and the oilers in the late 70s and early 80s were constantly busy.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I did one of my reserve 2 weeks. I was on Cowishui here out of San Diego, and JAG was being filmed on the Constellation, and we refueled the Constellation with all of this type of stuff up there, filming Harmon and Catherine Bell. Yeah, whoever. Well, Harmon was the name of I can't remember the guy, but Catherine Bell was the Marine, and her boyfriend was his name, and his character name was Harmon.
Harmon, yeah.
I don't remember, but anyhow, the 2 of them, they were up filming all of that. So.
Well, you mentioned reserves, so help us transition.
So
from...
when I left the Pasumsic, I went back to the fib school for a year. I came back as a senior instructor and helped my boss, who I'd served with before, had left and gone to his command tour in Hawaii. XO of a destroyer, then CO of a destroyer out there. But the new guy, I helped him make it through and trained a bunch of new instructors. So we had a good crew of people, and of course the enlisted people we had there were and the civilians that ran the computer were great, and had a good 1 year. One of the guys that I was working with got out and got a job with National Semiconductor. When I was due to get out, he got me a job with National Semiconductor. So I moved to the Bay Area, back to my home, and worked for National for 2 years, and then for Intel, and then I started on a streak of startup companies. Worked with a couple, and I did most of a year with Todd Shipyards on Navy ship repair. But I joined the reserves in the Military Sealift Command.
And about what year are we talking here?
Okay, I got off active duty in June of 1978.
Okay.
I started in July with National Semiconductor, and I started with Intel in June of 81 and left Intel in October of 82. So, and I joined the reserves in 79 with the Military Sealift Command at Oakland. And I was with them until 82, when I got command of a reserve unit in San Jose, the Training Command Pacific augmentation staff. I had a bunch of yeomen and clerk typists and that, so we came down to San Diego and would help them out anytime they got in heavy load and participate in their exercises. So
during this time, talk about your rank.
I was passed over as a lieutenant and got out as a lieutenant in the summer of 78. In the fall of 78, I was selected to lieutenant commander. And then as soon as I affiliated with the reserves, I checked in as a lieutenant. They said, "You're promoted to lieutenant commander," and I pinned on my lieutenant commander's oak leaves, or 2.5 stripes from the 2 stripes. And then after I got my reserve unit command, I made commander, went back to Military Sealift Command, and did my tours back in D.C. in the planning department, where they were finally revising the plans. In my first couple of years, we had some massive exercises. They were trying to figure out where the hell we were. Found out that most of the operational plans that were in effect when Reagan came in were developed in the 50s, and nobody had upgraded. So we're doing an exercise, and they're telling me to use destroyers that had been razor blades or transferred to foreign countries, carriers and battleships that weren't in commission. I think they had the South Dakota on the list, and she had been razor blades since 1961. So, I mean, and the Army was the same way. So they were completely revising the plans, and I found out when I was back there, I was talking with the major that was responsible for doing part of it. There was a Marine major for the Marine logistics side and Navy. The plans called for 4 LSTs, 2 gasoline tankers, 1 C-1 cargo ship, a little 400-foot cargo ship, and one standard tanker to be the total support for a major war in Korea with 500,000 men. That was what was on the books.
Oh my God.
So they had to go back through. Plus, the surge forces would have included all Fletcher class destroyers, and there hadn't been one in the fleet since 1971.
Oh, so you helped.
So we started talking that over, and I had pleasure of being able to point all this stuff out, and they made the major changes because the day after the Loma Prieta quake, I started a 2-week active duty.
Oh, gosh.
And it was, again, the same type of exercise, and the plans were 100%. I mean, they really made sense.
Oh, good.
And of course, one of the big parts of the plan was a Middle East thing.
Mm.
So we finished that off, and what happened 6 months later?
Yeah.
I mean, all the guys that I'd worked with, when I started, I had just started another command out of MSC. I'd taken over as a detachment CO for SIMA San Francisco, Ship's Intermediate Maintenance Activity.
Okay.
So I did my 2 weeks there because it was already on the books, and we went through it. And as usual, I said too much to the wrong people at the right time. I got my friend George Bruno was a port captain. He was also a captain in the reserves. The Mercy and the Comfort, the two big new hospital ships at that time, had just come into play, and I started screaming. I said, "Where are you going to get the crews?" The plan was that, on paper beforehand, is that the hospital portion would be a joint operation. You'd have Army, Navy, and Air Force on there. They'd all be reserves recalled and put on there. Well, I guess the head of View Med said, no, the Navy's going to man it, and we're going to do it this way. I put my 2 cents in one too many times. And George pulled me aside and said, "Stay out of it, John. This is not your battle." But I was the watch captain responsible for manning the space and the exercise with the civilian that ran. But that was a precursor for Gulf War One. Mm. Because everything that we went through and refined in that exercise, my shipmates from the reserves came in and manned it and ran it. Mm. Of course, Gulf War One, everything to go to the Gulf was supposed to go from the East Coast. Every bit of ammunition, all of the food, all of the fuel, everything went from the West Coast. Mm-hmm. Every single bit. They started to move all the stuff. They had a hurricane come through. Mm-hmm. And the normal heavy rains blocked all of the roads and the rivers to get to the ports the stuff was supposed to go out of. Mm-hmm. So they had to bring some of the ships through the canal, the smaller ones, and then pick up all the ammunition, most of the food stuff, because they couldn't go through the Suez Canal. Right. They had to go around. So it was 11,000 miles if they went off the East Coast. It was 11,200 miles if they went off the West Coast. 2 hours, 3 hours difference. So everything ended up coming off this coast and got out there. And so my friends were, about 50 of them were recalled, and they spent a year on active duty. Mm. And the shipping of all of the equipment was like clockwork. Okay. So I was there for that, and then I had my regular active duty in the spring. I was on my regular active duty when the Iowa's turret blew up. Mm-hmm. And friend and classmate was the skipper of the Iowa. Oh, gosh. And I'm in there, talking with a civilian and one of the chiefs, I've got a workbook to work on because I'm new to SEMA, getting it all in order, and the civilian, who was a retired SEAL, E9 gunner's mate, he said, "This is what happened. It's exactly what happened."
Wow.
They had a new crew. They were training the crew, and you use a blasting cap to ignite the powder in the 16-inch guns, 8-inch and above, anything that's powdered. The 6-inch, 8-inch, 12-inch, 16, 14, 16-inch, they all used during World War II. And it's a cloth bag, and it's got a grommet in there. And there's a groove on the blasting cap. So you push it in, and it clicks. If it's in properly, you hear the click. That's why there's always a command of silence in those turrets. Evidently, they didn't hear the click because somebody was talking. Whether it was issuing an order or
It was noisome.
that was just the noise, and you didn't hear it, so that when that breech closed, it hit the blasting cap. So if the breech isn't closed, it's just adios, because it just expands so fast. So, but that was just a sidelight. We had a lot of good stuff. I had a crew when I had SEMA 520. I had a great XO. He relieved me. He was very, very good. And all of my officers and all of my chiefs were just a fantastic bunch of people. And we had a very, very good 2 years in my command. And then I went back. I stayed with SEMA for another year as a training officer for the command, for 120, which was the command unit that ran all the 5 detachments. And then I went into the volunteer training unit, which means you can drill, you can accumulate points, but you don't get paid. So I did 5 years of that. I managed to get enough pay out of it. I worked Fleet Week for all the years that I was there. I did, not 96 I didn't, but 90, 92, 93, 94, 95. I handled all the computers because I was in the computer business. So handled the computers, and we set them up to manage all of the events, all of the people, get everything going. So it was a very challenging thing. And then I went to Korea for ultra-focus lens in '94 and met some really nice people. And when they called people up in '94 and '95 when we had the nuclear standoff with the North Koreans.
Yes.
I volunteered to go, but they didn't want to take me. A bunch of the other people in the VTU were called up to active duty for about 4 months for the first standoff in '94. And then when they had the second one in '95, I was called up, and I spent May, June, and half of July in Korea. We were on call. We had about 10 of us. There were about 16 of us in the group, but 10 of us in one section. And this lady captain, who was the XO of the unit, and our team, we did a complete tour of all of the places in Korea. Went to Daegu, to Jinhae, to Busan, and up to Pohang, and got familiar with all of the stuff. And if they hadn't finally settled the thing, we'd have been there probably another 6 months.
And by '91, you had been promoted to captain. Correct. So
right.
When did you actually retire here, John?
After the '96 ultra-focus lens,
Okay.
October the 1st, 1996.
Wow. That was a long... So altogether, how many years did you serve?
30.
Nice.
12 active, 18 reserve.
Wow.
And as I told you, I had more fun than I should have, and if I'd have been a little more serious, I think I probably could have made admiral. A lot of people, a little better than me, but did make it. But everything comes down to your choices.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you look to really enjoy your job, sometimes you get too off the right path. And everybody that I worked with throughout my career, skippers were just outstanding. First one was a damn fine sailor. Not too many people liked him. I didn't, but he was a damn fine sailor. Just in retrospect, it's a funny world. In 1966, we were at plane guard behind the Oriskany when the Oriskany fire occurred. We were sitting 1,000 yards astern, and they had somebody go over the side. So we got called to go pick them up, and we were going to 20 knots to move in to get to the person. When we got told, fall back into station, because the starboard delta helo came over and dropped the swimmer in. Well, the swimmer was my aunt's next door neighbor's son.
Oh, gosh. Wow. Small world.
And I didn't find that out until 25 years later. When he was a captain in the fire department in San Francisco. So we were talking about it. His dad was at Pearl Harbor.
Oh, gosh.
So
Small world.
it makes it a small world. At the same time, when I was at San Nick, we had a Master Chief bosun mate. And he was the head of the detail that was moving the fuses. And this dingbat kid that worked for him is one of these people that could not do anything right. He's the one that killed all those people. He was taking a fuse in his arms, coming out through the combing, and ignited it. He's standing, 1 foot behind him is the ocean. All he had to do is turn and throw it over the side.
Yeah.
He threw it back into the magazine and slammed the door on everybody. Killed the people in there immediately. So anyhow, he retired. He went to Vegas as work in the casinos as a security guard. He was a big bosun mate. He looked like Popeye. He had those big arms like it. He got called back to duty, and his wife got mad at him, threw him out of the house. So he went back in the Navy. He was on the PBRs. He jumped on a hand grenade. It didn't go off. He reached underneath and threw it over the side, and when it exploded when it hit the water. So he got a Silver Star. I'm not a Silver, a Navy Cross for it.
Oh.
Then they got promoted to E9. So he's out there. I'm talking to him. We're chit-chatting like this. And he said, yeah, I was looking for another job when I was leaving there. And he said, why don't you talk to my buddy? He said, he's the XO of a brand new LSD. He said, this guy, the chief, was the leading bosun mate on the third minesweeper, the Pirate and the Pledge, and the AM, or whatever the third one was. Okay, my first skipper on the destroyer was the XO of that minesweep that he was on. The guy that was XO on, I want to say, the Portland, I'm not sure which one, but anyhow, he was the leading bosun mate on the Pirate. And Bosun Ryan that I worked with in Vietnam, who was a warrant bosun, was the leading bosun mate on the Pledge. So all three of those, that's just one of those coincidences
Yeah.
that
Gosh.
happens.
Well, we want to thank you for your service, John. It was amazing, amazing amount of experiences that you had had.
Yeah.
I know Ed always likes to ask.
How did the military change you as a person?
It made me a lot better person. Not that good a person, but a lot better. It got me a lot more organized than I was, and seeing what I've missed by not paying that close of attention, it's helped me a lot in my civilian career. If I can throw a sidelight to it, I retired 23rd of December from Meggitt Safety Systems right down here. Okay, one of my biggest projects while I was at Meggitt was involved in the DDG smoke program. Meggitt makes all the smoke detectors that go on all of the Arleigh Burke class ships and the 3 Zumwalt class ships. So I have been for the last 12 years the technical expert on making sure those things got done right and got done on time. And there's a gal that is responsible for all of the orders for Bath and Huntington Ingalls, who are still building the Burkes. So when she wants something done, she calls me. And she said, when I told her I was retiring, she said, "You can't retire." But I've been the one that kind of bird dogged that, made sure that everybody knew what had to be done on the floor, and made sure that the things to ensure that it got going happened.
Good.
So,
Well, thank you for your service, John. We appreciate your
thank you
story.
for listening to all my stories. So, and hopefully somebody will get some benefit out
I
of it.
know. I'm sure they will.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, and Ed, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Yes.
Our pleasure.
Yes.